President Trump has racked up a remarkable string of victories over the last week, including defusing what looked like the opening act to World War III between Israel and Iran. Daniel McCarthy, he's the editor of Modern Age Journal, and he joins us now to unpack how Trump's bold move caught both critics and allies off guard. So, Daniel, thanks so much for joining us. So how did Trump manage to find a third way, right? It's not just the isolationists. It's not just the interventionists. He said, you know what? I'm going to pave a different path. How was he able to do that?
Well, the remarkable thing is that Donald Trump was actually true to all of the things he had said on the campaign trail. He was true to his own record in his first term, and yet everyone was still surprised. So President Trump is willing to use force in small amounts in order to get the results that need to be achieved, but he doesn't get us involved in ongoing endless wars, open-ended conflicts abroad. He uses just enough force to resolve the crisis at hand. And he had done that successfully in the first term, and now he's done it even more successfully with this intervention, this bombing of Iran, which has really, done a tremendous amount of damage to their nuclear program. And more importantly, it's taught them a lesson that if they restart a nuclear program, they will face all kinds of difficulty and, to use Trump's phrase, fire and fury in the future. So I think it's a very powerful disincentive to them to continue causing this kind of mischief.
Dan, it's great to have you here on the show. It's been too long. I think this was remarkable in many ways, and your piece in Compact, which people should go read, is a great short case article for how this happened. Could you say a little bit for our audience about these two camps and how they exist in tension today within and without the administration?
Yeah, it's unfortunate because, the Make America Great movement and in general, the movement that's supporting Donald Trump has a lot of different elements to it. And there are some folks who are always looking for kind of the most dramatic possible scenario in the world. They have a kind of penchant for apocalypticism. And that's true of both some of the hawks who are interventionists and want a very militant foreign policy. And it's also true of certain doves who want to have, a foreign policy of doing very little or practically nothing in the world. Both of them tend to imagine worst case scenarios. On the one hand, worst case scenarios coming from foreign powers that might be trying to attack us or otherwise harm us. And in the case of the doves, it's the worst case scenario where they are afraid that if we do absolutely anything at all, it will provoke a hornet's nest of resistance against us and cause us to get enmeshed in a conflict similar to the Iraq War or the Afghanistan War that'll just last decades. And Donald Trump basically was able to tell the ideologues on both sides that that's not what he was going to do. He was simply going to use force in a measured manner in order to obtain peace and get rid of a nuclear program that was a danger to its entire region.
So what's the lay of the land there now in D.C.? The response, the fallout after, Donald Trump went his own way. He didn't follow either camp. What's going on right now in D.C.?
Yeah, there are people who have sour grapes. They wish that Trump had done exactly what they wanted. Some folks actually wanted to have a more prolonged military engagement because that's the kind of thing they live for. It's the kind of thing they enjoyed having during the days of the Iraq War and the Afghan War. And then there are others who are so dovish that they believe that even an effective strike that takes out an enemy's, nuclear capacity is something that goes beyond the limits of, the most strict possible libertarian approach to foreign policy. And therefore, they're unhappy with that. But I think those wings are both outliers. And most supporters of Donald Trump are very happy, actually, with the fact that, first of all, that we stopped a nuclear program that was quite dangerous, but even more so that we were able to stop it very effectively with a single strike and that has called off basically what had been a 12-day war between Israel and Iran. I mean, just think about, how effective Donald Trump has been in creating peace where there had been a situation of war beforehand.
Yeah, and what strikes me is, as you say, he doesn't follow a fixed rule. He just does what he thinks is best at the time. And that actually strikes a chord with many of us as similar to what people in Western political thought have said for thousands of years about the virtue of prudence, which is doing the right thing in the right situation, which varies depending on the situation. Can you say more about that? Because if he keeps on doing that, I would guess that you would have a sort of new a new realism, a new foreign policy sort of birthed from a series of those actions.
I think that's what we see emerging here. For a long time, at least for 20 years or more, America has tended to follow a foreign policy that is defined by utopianism and by certain ideological objectives, such as regime change and nation building abroad, which have really been very extravagant and have not had a good grounding in realism and what can actually practically be done in the world. What we can practically do with our military force is use it to destroy enemy forces, whether those are an enemy nuclear program or whether it's an enemy army. But when it comes to actually changing the nature of another polity and trying to inculcate a different set of political values among its people, that's something that's been, tried time and time again and has almost always failed. The one exception, in fact, kind of proves the rule. The fact that West Germany and Japan after World War II became pro-Western liberal democracies, that's owing not just to what the United States did, but to the fact that the Germans and the Japanese were looking at the fact that the Soviet Union had its eyes set on them and would have, been very happy to reconstruct Germany and Japan in a Soviet fashion, in a communist fashion, if the Japanese and the Germans did not choose to side with America instead. So they were facing a constrained choice, and that's why they made the choice they did. But in general, trying to transform other people's countries into a Switzerland in the Middle East or into a clone of the United States of America, that doesn't work very well at all, and it winds up getting us enmeshed in these kinds of nation-building wars which go on interminably.
If you go back to Donald Trump's first term, he's famous for not starting any new wars. Now, we all know the military-industrial complex, they're not going to go out quietly, right? So how do we see this playing out? Because as long as Donald Trump is in office, per our conversation that we're having here, I feel like at some point the military-industrial complex will just try and rise up in some way, shape, or form, right?
Maybe. I mean, the thing about the military-industrial complex is it wants to make a lot of weapons. It wants to make a lot of, ships and airplanes. It doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily quite as invested in ongoing wars as you might imagine. So as long as they're able to sell a lot of material, they're less concerned about whether that material is being used on the battlefield or not. The temptation is always that Congress will give in to military contracting that takes place in their own districts for the construction of new weapons programs, most of which will wind up being rather useless in an actual conflict. But nevertheless, that's kind of the worst side, or at least the ongoing danger that the military-industrial complex presents. It's not so much the industrial complex is always trying to get us directly into a war. Oftentimes, military contractors can be quite happy simply selling arms to the rest of the world, which in fact they're doing quite prolifically right now. And while that certainly is something that we need to be concerned about, it's quite different from the idea that they're going to lure us into another Iraq war or a Vietnam war or anything like that.
But you do point out, I think, quite well at the end here in a provocative fashion that we are entering a time that's going to be rocky no matter what. And I want to cite what you said here. You said, to put it bluntly, America cannot sustain the leadership it has exercised for the last 30-odd years, which demands global policing that's not compatible with national self-government. But the corollary to a necessary reduction in American global rule will be the exercise of leadership and initiative by many other states, including our friends. And so, in other words, as we step back and don't act as the tyrannical global hegemon, our friends and allies are more or less throughout the world are going to start taking action on their own. And this is what you saw Netanyahu do. And that presents a picture, as I read you, of trouble ahead, or at least a rocky road ahead as we sort of figure this out, because people are going to take action on their own, and then we're going to be struggling with whether to intervene or not. Is that an accurate picture?
Yeah, it's going to make some people uncomfortable because you're going to have other nations and other blocks of nations, whether it's Israel or the Europeans, taking action in their own neighborhoods in order to maintain the peace and create an order in which their democracies are able to survive. And up until now, the idea has been that America has to be the leader in all of this, that if we want to see a certain situation in the Middle East or in Europe, we have to get involved directly using our forces in a very large way in order to create that situation. Now we're getting into a different kind of strategy, a different picture, where Israel or the Europeans or others will be able to police their own neighborhoods. But that does mean that sometimes they will be policing their own neighborhoods and they might ask for the United States to help them out. And so there is this, bit of there's a mixed feeling among some non-interventionists and some who'd like us to have a more America First foreign policy, because on the one hand, they do see the necessity to have our allies take care of their own neighborhoods to a greater extent. But then they also feel a certain nostalgia for the old days when America could tell an ally or could tell a number of allies, no, you're not allowed to do things. We're the global hegemon. We decide when there's going to be a war, and we decide how big it's going to be. Now, you can't have it both ways. So if you're going to give up the hegemonic power to decide when a war is going to start everywhere around the world, then you have to give a certain amount of leeway to your allies to take matters into their own hands. And that does entail some risk that, the United States might wind up having to supplement the force of its allies. But it also means that we are not constantly being the driver of conflicts, all around the world. And what we found really over the last 25 years is that efforts of the Clinton administration, the George W. Bush administration, the Barack Obama administration, Joe Biden, all of these different administrations, their efforts to stabilize things and to stop conflicts all around the world only wound up making greater instability and actually causing more chaos. So the more decentralized approach, the more federalist approach that Donald Trump is taking towards a global strategy is the right one, but it certainly does carry certain risks.
Well, there's one more fight that I want to ask you about before we let you go, Dan, because it started out on X in a big way. It's Elon and Trump. Right now, how do we get this coalition to get back together and everything under one MAGA sun again?
Well, I think the personalities involved are they're outsized, and therefore, it's not entirely surprising that someone who is has been, in fact, the world's richest man, and someone who's the most powerful man in the world as president of the United States, that they should have certain ego conflicts as well as philosophical conflicts. But I think that this is a case where voters and other people who are not at quite as high a level of status as either Elon Musk or Donald Trump. Nevertheless, there is a groundswell of belief among Americans who would like to see this country back on the right track, who don't want it to get distracted by conflicts, as to whether we're going far enough in the direction of, say, cutting government or far enough in the direction of some of the programs that perhaps President Trump supports. They really want to see, the best of both worlds, which is if we're going to have government programs at all, they need to be efficient. They need to be for citizens, not for illegal aliens. And everything that's extraneous, whether it's U.S. aid or whether it's, any number of other programs, these things need to be cut rigorously. And Elon Musk made a great start on that, but now there's a need for Congress to follow through and do more. And there will be a continuing need for this administration over the next 3 years to continue to pare back and to try to stop this continual expansion of the government, of the administrative state that we've seen, going back really to the Franklin Roosevelt administration. So what I would caution basically all, folks out there who support the agenda of reducing the size of the government is simply don't be impatient. This monstrosity, this Leviathan was created over the course of decades. It's going to take a while in order to get it under control. Elon Musk has made a good start. Donald Trump is continuing to do excellent work, but there's going to be a lot more effort needed in the next several years here. And losing hope or getting into arguments with your allies is counterproductive.
That is very well said. Listen, if Donald Trump can go through and figure out how to drop a bomb on Iran and not start World War III, we can figure out Elon Musk and the friendship. I think that's safe to say. Daniel McCarthy, thanks so much for your time. Great stuff.
Thank you.